This is Taya Graham reporting for the Real News Network in Baltimore City, Maryland. This is the first of a series of investigations into the interactions of women and the criminal justice system. We're beginning with an examination of the death of Tyra McClary. We spoke with her sister, Jackie. McClary's body was found in this Northwest Baltimore alley, buried under a pile of mulch in September of 2006. Her legs were wrapped in a plastic bag, and her hands were bound. The medical examiner said homicide could not be ruled out due to trauma to her adrenal and thyroid glands, but ultimately her case was ruled undetermined, which means that the manner of her death could not conclusively be ruled a homicide. It's a category of legal limbo that engulfs hundreds of cases a year in Baltimore, most of which the medical examiner's office say are overdoses.
Too many suspicious deaths that are undetermined, that to say that this is coincidental. And even if it was coincidental, knowing that there is structural racism, systems understanding that, you would think they would have some way to communicate why it is not structural racism.
But while the McClary family acknowledges that Tyra had drugs in her system, other evidence points to murder. And they are left in limbo too, family members without closure or certainty of who or what killed their loved one. This is their story and tale of the life and death of Tyra McClary.
Growing up, she was in and out of my life, but she lived in the home. She was battling with addiction, but she always tried to do good by me, make sure everything that I wanted was taken care of, never missed a meal, had great birthdays and great Christmases. She was amazing to me, even with all the bad that probably the world saw in her, she was the best person to me.
She was just always a good person. That was just like my baby. Okay. So
even sometimes she would, be in prison for a few months. She would come home and always surprise me. I would never know she would be home. And I would just be like, oh my God, it's Christmas. I missed you so much. But it was even in her absence, she would call every day. She would write me notes.
My little sister was like my child. She wasn't like a sister. She always looked up to me and I always tried to take care of her. And one time she fell, she got back up, she struggled, but she tried to get clean.
She was very transparent because she was like, I don't want you to suffer the same things that I did. I was very closed in. I didn't talk to my mother about things. I didn't communicate with people around me. She was like, so I kept everything inside. And how I dealt with that was addiction, trying to get away. She was like, even after having you, I tried really, really hard to keep you and, be the best mom that I could be. But she was like, it's just something about it. I'm always chasing that high, just trying to escape from everything.
The day she went missing, I left work and I thought I was on my way. And she said, well, I'm just going to wait for you up at my mother's. Mama said, no, you got to leave because, what I'm saying, I got to leave. You got to leave out my house. And I was like, okay, her boyfriend when they got her. I said, well, bring it to me. I'm getting my truck washed. Meet me here. So I'm like, it's getting dark. Where is she? He said, I dropped off to you 45 minutes ago. I said, where? And he said, up in Belvedere. I was like, oh my God.
The day that they found her body, it was kind of weird. It was the first day of my 11th grade year. They picked me up from school early. So essentially, I never tell people this. My first thought was something happened to my mother. It's the first week of school. I haven't heard from her. But I don't know what happened. So before we walked into my grandma's house, they was like, they found your mother. They didn't really want to tell me details. When we were planning the funeral, they really didn't tell me much about what happened.
I was at work and my sister-in-law called and she was crying. I couldn't get it out of her. And I thought something was wrong with my brother because sometimes when he sells clothes and stuff, he sell it in the neighborhoods. It's dangerous down there. It actually wasn't far where he'd be at from where my sister was found. So I was like, what's wrong with my brother? She said, no, Tyra's there. And I screamed and I almost lost consciousness. And the doctors I worked for was all trying to give me injections. I was saying, no, I got to get to my mother.
So I went and got like articles from the paper and things like that. And I wanted to know, like, I was like, I am 16. Like, I want to know what happened. Like, she's gone now. I want to know like what happened, like how it happened. So yeah, I read that they found her like behind a dumpster with her pants down and like her body was decomposed because it was out. I was like, oh. I was like so hurt because like you hear stuff like that on TV, you never think it's going to happen to you. Yes, I had to go through therapy for many, many years.
Everybody knows Tyra was murdered. Everybody knows.
And they said it was her body, and I wanted to see, and they wouldn't let me see. Because her body was decomposing, and they didn't let me see. And I was like, so what was the cause of death? From my understanding, her feet was tied with trash bags, and her underwear, her pants were down to her knees. And I worked in the medical field over 10 years. Her adrenal glands bleed out. That means strangulation. So how you gonna cause them? Say my sister death was undetermined. Just try to sweep it under the rug.
We heard about her death. She was someone we knew very well, and we heard about her death before it was printed. We have people up in that neighborhood. They called us immediately to tell us what happened.
It could have been a drug overdose, but I'm like, you don't just put yourself in that position. You don't put mulch over top of you to hide your body. Somebody's trying to hide you. So I was like, I just want them to look into figure out what went on in that situation. I thought that they would look into the case more because of how her body was found. But when we got the death certificate, I was like, I don't even understand what an undetermined death is at that point. I was like, what does that even mean?
You know, that was our baby sister. And they killed her like that and just left her. And I felt like she was crying out for me when it was happening because I felt it. They said they found her body on August 30th. My sister died on August 28th because I felt it. And then somebody was using her checks. And they wasn't pursuing it. I was like, well, why? I don't follow up. They're using her checks. Somebody's using her checks in the store, trying to use her checks, her paychecks, her personal checks. It just that the detectives wasn't answering the phone. It was a mess.
Now, I know there's a lot of rumors on the street, but people made a special point to call us to tell us how she was found. Because it wasn't just, the medical examiner and the police didn't just happen upon her. There's community members that had to be traumatized by that.
I knew one guy, he said, I used to see Tyra every day. She would come in and speak to me. I would give her a few dollars, and then I didn't see her again. He was like, that's not like her to be like missing in action. She had a routine. And then like I heard like a week prior to her murder, like she got in a scuffle in the area and like 3 women like fought her or something. I was hearing like a couple of different things, but they were trying to like shelter me from things, but I really wanted to know.
I wanted to see the police report. I never was able to get a police report, you know what I'm saying? And when I went to order flowers for her funeral, a girl was found right behind the train tracks on Belvedere. The day so that was a couple of days after that. And I said, this is out of control around here.
It seems, when I've heard comments, public comments by the medical examiner, it's that it's an empirical science that is completely devoid of any bias at all. But we're operating in a system of white supremacy. So there is always a bias.
Because I stopped thinking about it. I was like, I don't want to brew in it, but I was like, I just want to know what happened.
People who just use drugs have an illness. They don't understand it, and they just using their deaths and saying undetermined, like nobody cares.
Do you think that's what police think when they look at these cases?
Yes, absolutely. Because who cares about an addict? Who cares about a prostitute? You're out here breaking the law and doing things that you're not supposed to do. It's kind of like, oh, maybe you deserve to get killed. Then one less person I gotta chase on the streets about drugs. One less prostitution case I gotta follow.
It took me a couple of years to get, months and months to get sleep. I couldn't sleep. I felt a spirit over top of me until one day in my sleep, I actually walked down this hall. I kept looking at these rooms, these white rooms, and I seen her. She smiled at me, and it was the first night I could go to sleep.
I know some cases do go cold where you can't get answers, but I feel like that one, or even some of the other women, it was just closed so quickly. Like, and even when my aunt and my grandmother, they were talking about it, it was just like brushed to the side. Like, it's nothing we can do about it.
I was at work, and The pathologist called me. It was very nice. She talked to me for a long time. She said, when I heard about how they found your sister's body, I wanted to do the autopsy myself. She said, I did it thoroughly and I did it again. She said no trauma to the body, but her adrenal glands were asphyxiated. And then when they sent, I don't know, Stephen interceded, and he sent out the autopsy report to the lady did Anna Nicole Smith's. Mm-hmm. When he said, I'm sorry for your loss, but don't let this go. Your sister was murdered. Every day I think about my sister. Every day.
What would give you that peace?
To know that somebody cared enough to investigate and see what happened to her.
Advocates say the McClary family is right. The deaths of Black women are often ignored.
Women of color, trans women of color who die on the street, everyone seems to indicate what happened. They're not willing to come forward because they're afraid. And then the death turns out undetermined. Now, one concern is that, I'd like to know if the investigative information from the police is being used by the medical examiner. How and to what consistency and what veracity is that being done?
Because in police departments across the country, the deeply embedded racism and the deeply embedded good old boys network, it takes some time. And to actually develop trust with the community, that takes a lot of time.
And in Baltimore, where undetermined deaths roughly equal the number of homicides each year, the costs of investigating a murder are also steep. According to a study by the National Institute of Health, the average homicide costs roughly $1.2 million to prosecute. Meanwhile, since many of the victims have drugs in their system, their deaths are easy to overlook. But there are also a large number of undetermined deaths that don't involve drugs. The most recent medical examiner's annual report lists roughly 246 deaths as undetermined other, a category which includes unclassified deaths where the primary cause of death was blunt force trauma or violent injuries, or even gunshot wounds, that also remain undetermined.
We actually divide the undetermineds into two groups, one which are undetermined due to drugs and one which are undetermined due to other causes, and that's a very small number. It's a question of being intellectually honest in this whole process. More likely than not, these are mostly accidents, but does that meet the criteria for a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Also, a 2016 investigation by the Department of Justice found that the Baltimore City Police Department dismissed women who had been sexually assaulted and raped and often mocked female victims of violence.
The police department made roughly 44% of its stops in two small, predominantly African American districts that contain only 11% of the city's population.
Which is why The Real News will continue to follow this story and investigate, and also to give voice to the women and their families who refuse to suffer in silence.
But it just was bothering that it clearly looks like a homicide. It smells like a homicide. Like, why wouldn't it be investigated as such?